let's talk about this with some education professionals. Dr Emily Grossman, a former teacher, and Professor Robert Coe from Durham University, where the study was done. Good morning to both of you. Professor, let me begin with you, and let's just start with really what, on the face of it, and perhaps in reality is quite a boring question. Tell us about the social science behind this. How did you go about arriving at your results?
Well, we just looked at the research that's already out there. Most of it is quite long-standing, actually. It's not new. For example, the research on praise, some of that goes back 20 or more years. And it's a complicated message. You know, we're not saying praise is all bad, but it matters how you praise and how much and when you do it. But you know, that's across all the different aspects that we found. Some things that are very effective practices, some of the obvious things, I guess. Some less obvious things, and some things that aren't supported by evidence. It's just collecting together research that's already out there.
You've brought up the point that seems to be seized upon by the newspapers, and indeed we've done it as well, Robert, this idea of unearned praise actually being quite meretricious and not very good. Why is that? Why doesn't it work?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things I think the research tells us about praise. So one is about praising students, learners, children, for things that they know and that you know as a teacher actually aren't very good. So they've done a piece of work. It might be better than what they've done before. It might be something they've really tried hard, and the teacher says, "Oh, well done, that's fantastic." Now, the child might hear that as being, okay, this teacher thinks that's the best I'm going to do, that's as good as I'm going to be, and that's quite undermining. And the other thing about praise is about what you praise for. So if you praise children and say, well done, you're really clever, actually that's undermining too. And what you should praise children for is things they can control. So you say, well done, you've obviously worked really hard at that, or I can see that you've taken on board the feedback I gave you last time, or you know, you've used this strategy that we talked about. Those things that a student can control themselves, or a child, even a small child,
yeah,
then it's positive to praise for those. But if you just praise for ability and say, oh, you're very clever, that undermines their future performance.
It just sounds like we shouldn't really be pulling the wool over their eyes, Emily, doesn't it? But Emily, I think you take the view that actually, for instance, boys and girls need praise in different ways. Explain that.
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous to sort of say that we shouldn't be praising students generically. I think that exactly the point that's just come up is that some students would take that as, oh, well, it's okay to just be mediocre and it's okay to not have achieved as well as I could have done.
It does need to be earned, though, doesn't it? That's an important... You're setting an important connection between effort, aptitude and reward.
Exactly, but with some students who have low self-esteem, that's a huge problem in the classroom, and perhaps it's something that's become entrenched for them, perhaps they've got difficult things going on at home. And for those sort of students, a lavish laying on of praise can actually be really beneficial if it just breaks that cycle of feeling that they can't achieve, feeling that they're in an environment where actually their best isn't ever going to get them out of the rut that they're stuck in. Telling those students again and again that they're doing well, that their efforts are being rewarded, that they're getting a little bit better even if it's not quite as good as they could be eventually, can actually just help them and encourage them to do more and more and more, and to believe that they can actually get there. And you mentioned the difference between boys and girls. Now, I mean, I teach science and maths at secondary school level, and I do find that in some cases the girls particularly that come to me for extra help and for extra lessons are feeling really lacking in confidence, particularly if they're in mixed educational schools, and they do need a lot of extra support, they need a lot of extra encouragement and praise just to believe that they have actually got what it takes in what are traditionally quite male-dominated subjects, often taught by men, and often taught in a way that's quite sort of sink or swim, quite sort of like competitive. And often those girls sit at the back and are scared to talk up or to say things, speak up, because they're worried they might get it wrong. And in those situations, I think praise is really important.
Yeah. There's a flip side to that debate, isn't there, in primary school, where most of the teachers tend to be women, but that's a debate for another day. Let's take you through some emails, see if we can make them as interesting as some of those thoughts were just. And Tina in Wimbledon says, when I think back to my maths classes, I remember there were 5 girls who, quote, got it, and 16 who either muddled along. Some of us were so bored in class that there were discussions whether we should join the year above. We felt stifled. I envy my children who are taught in ability groups where they're stimulated, where subjects are explained to them according to their ability to understand. What absolute nonsense to try to change this. Heather Fletcher says she's a teacher with 40 years experience, writes, the proposed new methods of teaching mixed abilities rather than grouping must have been suggested by educationalists who are unaware of the changed conditions in the classroom. Sadly, today, with children's rights, English as a second language and a lack of support from some parents over disciplinary issues, imparting knowledge with enthusiasm is often only possible by grouping students into ability groups. Robert, you're smiling at that thought. Why?
Okay, yeah. Well, okay, so...
We spotted you.
I mean, that just isn't supported by the research, actually. And this is a really controversial one. The research doesn't say that you shouldn't set by ability. It just says it doesn't make a lot of difference. Yeah. And that's a bit baffling, because if you've been in... I was a maths teacher, and you know, the maths teacher's instinct is that children come into a lesson with very different readiness to understand particular ideas, and grouping them into different classes, it seems like an obvious way to deal with that. But actually, I think there's a whole series of reasons why it doesn't lead to big benefits. In fact, it doesn't really make much difference. So one is that you get a kind of false sense of security, that you think because you've got a setted group or a group of students who you've put on the same table or whatever, that solved the problem of any differences, and therefore you can treat them all the same. And actually you can't. Even in a setted group, you have a wide range of abilities, of prior knowledge, of different motivations and so on, and all the factors that determine how much children learn, they are not all the same in that context. So even in a setted group, a good teacher has to have strategies for dealing with a mixture of abilities.
Well, look,
and I think what the research is saying is that if you have those strategies...
Yeah, go on, Emily, go on.
Well, I absolutely agree. Of course, the teacher has to have ways of strategies of dealing with mixed abilities, even within a so-called same ability group. But isn't that just compounding the problem if you then say, well, actually, because it's hard to deal with mixed abilities even within a small group, that we'll have all the mixed abilities of every range and every extent of the struggling and the high achievers all in one group? Because then you're stopping the high achievers from getting on and achieving even higher things. We're already falling behind, particularly in maths and science. We're falling behind a lot of countries, for example, in East Asia with the high achievers.
If you think that you've solved that problem, and then you don't have to worry about that because you've got a setted group, then actually it'll end up being worse. Okay. So you still have to solve that problem. That's my point. You've still got able children who have to be challenged, and you've still got children who need a lot more support.
But it's much easier to
You've
challenge
always got that anyway. So.
Emily, one of the problems that people find...
Well,
hang on, guys, hang on,
Robert, just hold that thought.
Hold that thought. Yeah. One of the problems, Emily, people find, particularly parents feel in this debate, is that very often we have this nomenclature, don't we? We have this jargon around teaching. And let's remember as well that Robert's not advancing these arguments, he's mainly sort of collating them and giving them some weighting. But two of his findings focus on child-centred learning, which to some degree his evidence debunks, and also, controversially, that passive learning can work. What on earth do we mean by those two? What's passive learning, and why might it not work? Or indeed, why does it work?
Well, I think, well, he's talking about what's called discovery learning, which is...
Emily, that's you.
All right. So yes, discovery learning is where students are allowed to actually figure things out for themselves and come up with the ideas, and are then taught after that how that actually applies to the subject. And this report has said that actually doesn't work. Now, that may well be the case, but I do also think that we're taking a huge average and we're ironing out sort of all the uniqueness of each student and each different teachers' learning technique. Some teachers may be able to make that really work for their classrooms. Some students may really be able to benefit from that. On average, the report says it doesn't work. Okay, well then we have to listen to that data.
Robert, since you did all the work on this, we'll give you the last word, and it's really around this point that, you know, at the end of the day, when you ask parents, when you ask pupils, they say, you know what matters? A teacher we can respect, and that's actually terribly ineffable, isn't it? And yet all kids know when they see one.
It is, yeah. They pretty much do, and actually that's one of the things that's really important from here, is that if we want to find out which teachers are effective and in what ways they are, one of the best ways is actually to ask the students. I think that's really important.
Robert Coe, Emily Grossman, really appreciate your thoughts this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Keep your thoughts coming in, please.